Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Karen Saupe. Choosing a career is one of the most important decisions we make in life, but what do you do when your career starts feeling like a game and you don't want to play anymore? Our guest today found a way to stop playing and start living. Join us on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is John Rodden, an independent scholar and prolific writer who resigned from a prestigious university in order to pursue a wide range of intellectual interests and a more satisfying life. Welcome, John. You were, in fact, in a good tenured job, and you had some name recognition. You were making a reputation as a scholar, and a lot of people would say you had it made. And then in 1993, you walked away from it all. And you wrote that you couldn't escape the sense of being part of an enterprise I could not defend, did not want to defend, and yet defended every day. Tell me about what was wrong there.
Well, the values that I was experiencing at that elite institution seemed very much in conflict with what the public thought the institution was about. Namely, what I began to notice increasingly was that those taxpayers, parents, alumni, and above all students, thought that the institution was fundamentally dedicated to the students and to teaching. Whereas any prestigious American university in the upper ranks of the elite academy is offering a credential, and the credential is largely based on the recognition that the professors and other related activities at the university can garner. And those are not based on teaching. Teaching is a local activity that's addressed to an immediate small group, right, the students. Mm-hmm. The students will know who the excellent teachers are. However, national name recognition is not determined by teaching quality university, but rather by research, by government funding, mm-hmm, by other related matters, and those vastly swamped the teaching dedication. That is not so much a problem to me as the hypocrisy with which the institution was operating, because it was proclaiming to those who were paying the bills, mm-hmm, the taxpayers, alumni, parents, and above all the students, that the values were indeed oriented toward the classroom. Mm-hmm. The reality was so different.
And so you were completely frustrated by that.
Yes, it was the conflict that I was increasingly encountering now that I was a junior professor, mm-hmm, and then culminating in, am I going to accept an offer of permanent employment, right, from this institution, which would mean another 30 or 40 years here? Mm-hmm. At the time, I was also given the possibility of becoming the chair of the department within a year or two, so that I was going to have a very official administrative capacity in promoting that. And putting all that together, and then looking at my actual needs, which were extremely eccentric and idiosyncratic, mm-hmm, I simply thought, the higher up you go, the harder it is to leave. Mm. The longer you're in, the less daring you become.
Sure.
The more you have to lose, because the more heavily invested you are.
And that's true in any profession, I'm sure.
Any profession, any walk of life. And so, why not now, in my early 30s, before I can't do it, before I become risk averse? No family, single, still living an extremely modest life.
So you weren't going to have to give up lots of amenities?
No, what I realized was that I have an underutilized skill. I have a secret resource, a weapon with which I can establish a different path, namely a gift for asceticism.
So it was not going to be a big sacrifice for you to do this, just a really difficult decision.
Right. What I realized was that my material and physical needs are extremely modest. Mm-hmm. My spiritual and psychological needs are very high.
And those weren't being met with
They
the
were
career
not
path
being
you took.
sufficiently met, and I sensed that the dissatisfaction would grow. Mm-hmm. So why not try the experiment? I also had this naivete, or perhaps supreme confidence, that, hey, if it doesn't work out, you'll go somewhere else and you can try your hand at this again. If not at this institution, maybe at a different one mm-hmm. that has different
values or priorities.
Yeah.
What brought you into the profession in the first place?
I think what brought me into the profession was the same set of experiences that brings almost everyone
into the academic
world. And it was not reading a book by one of my professors. Mm-hmm. It was not encountering one of his articles in a well-known journal. It was the experience of sitting in his office and in his classroom, or hers, and talking.
Sure.
And listening.
Right.
It was a few caring, passionate teachers who convinced me that I wanted to pursue that calling, that vocation. And first I taught high school.
Mm-hmm. English.
Yes, I taught English and history, and I treated that as kind of a trial, a test run, that if I like this, I'll go on.
Okay.
And I just did it 1 year, and I said, I love it.
I'm going on.
Yeah. I taught at a small Catholic private high school mm-hmm. in Pennsylvania, and then decided, okay, let's see what it would be like to pursue a PhD.
Now, why not stay in high school teaching if that was satisfying for you? There was something more you wanted.
Well, there again, I decided this is an experiment. This I can always go back to. Mm-hmm. I felt that I've got the energy and the drive and the dream right now to teach at an even higher intellectual level mm-hmm. and teach more mature students. That's what made me think of college teaching. And of course, the experience, since I had just been at a college, was still so fresh. Right. There I was teaching seniors in a high school at the age of 21. Mm-hmm. They were 17 or 18 years old.
I had the same experience, and I was so afraid they'd realize that I was just a kid.
Yeah.
Right? So you went on to grad school to pursue that dream. And is that where you started feeling disillusioned, or was that part okay too?
That's where I began feeling the disillusion, though I had a marvelous experience, a really charmed life in graduate school. And I had the extremely fortunate and, again, rare experience of never actually proceeding through the whole PhD program and dissertation process. Namely, what happened was, because I had so much wanted to be a writer, I was doing a lot of freelancing, and I was working on a topic that was highly intellectual and submitted it to a publisher, Oxford University Press.
Oh, which is top-of-the-line prestigious.
It was a top-of-the-line press. They immediately wrote me back and accepted the manuscript for publication before I had a PhD committee.
Wow.
I wrote the book, assembled a committee, and they simply accepted the book
as your dissertation.
As my dissertation.
Oh my goodness. So
I never went for an interview mm-hmm. to any university to seek a job. I never attended any conference of any discipline in which they have job fairs. Mm-hmm. I never had to write a dissertation per se, or limit myself or orient myself toward a subfield or toward a small group of professors who would serve on a PhD committee. I was, from the start, addressing a much wider audience and just doing this my own way.
So you had some star power and some control from the get-go about this. What was your book about?
It was called The Politics of Literary Reputation.
Literary reputation.
And that was the subject, that is, how writers acquire reputations.
Interesting.
What are the different conditions, sociological, historical, political, and otherwise,
So even as you were succeeding in this field right from the beginning, you were critiquing it
Yes.
and
Very much
self-conscious
so.
about your own performance in it.
Very much so, yes.
So what were you feeling you couldn't do as a full-time tenured academic?
Well, you know, I believe that it was the taste of a larger world and of honoring my own rhythms without any kind of exterior determination that emboldened me to finally take this step. Because so many people told me, this is madness, John.
Right, sure.
You just have tenure at this major
Nobody would
institution.
advise you to walk away.
In the course of writing that first book, I went away for about 2 years. I was in the middle of my PhD program, and I just left and financed myself to do research and live abroad.
How did you finance yourself?
Really through my lifestyle. That is, I discovered that I could live on a couple of $1,000s a year.
And one can if one's willing to do without.
And I had a tremendous experience. I went to communist East Germany. Wow. The wall was just coming down, but East Germany was still officially a communist country before reunification in 1990. And I did not spend a single night in a motel, bed and breakfast, anywhere, simply through invitations from different people. They would house me overnight.
Really?
There were no telephones. Very few people even had a car. I had met some people in West Germany who gave me the addresses of their friends and relatives and wrote out a letter that I was supposed to present at the door. I would arrive in a train station and walk to the person's house and present the letter. Usually what would happen is I would ask if I could go to the school with one of their children, because the textbooks had all been thrown out, the communist system was crumbling. The principal of the school would typically ask me to come in and teach some classes on the Western point of view. For instance, how did the Westerners look at the Berlin Wall? We always saw it as the anti-fascist wall of protection to keep you out so that you didn't drop bombs on us and start World War III. And I would say, well, no, we saw the Berlin Wall as a way of fencing you in, you see.
So again, your teaching was all about starting these conversations, these human conversations.
Yes, and that experience of living such a free life. You see, I came back to the university, and as free as the university is compared to most institutions and professions, it started to seem excessively narrow and limiting to me by comparison with my life there. And so I said, well, why can't I do this all the time?
And a lot of people would be terrified by that thought of not knowing where you're going to sleep tomorrow night even. But to you, that was liberating.
That was liberating.
And energizing.
Yes. And of course, I was young. I was in perfect health. I had no family or other kinds of responsibilities, no debts from school or other histories. So I felt that I was already free. And I remember the line that I always loved from the Old Testament, first freedom, then service. That is, that I wanted to drink in this liberation and then, from a sense of fullness of life,
be motivated
and so,
to give back. And do you get to teach? I know you get to do scholarship, but what kinds of opportunities do you get?
Well, very occasionally I'll get requested to teach a night class. More frequently, I will be asked to visit, as I am here at Calvin, by a colleague or a friend and teach his classes I'm going to do in a couple of hours. That's immensely pleasurable to me. Probably my greatest loss is that kind of contact with the students.
Sure.
But what I've also found, and this was an amazing discovery, is that in many ways the relationships with students and even colleagues have been purified by my departure. That is, before there was always at least a subtle sense of hierarchy. Teacher, student.
And networking.
Or, yes, senior professor, junior professor. There were letters of recommendation. There were political sensitivities because of committees and other matters. Now, I have no connection to the hierarchy.
So grades and reappointments and recommendation letters
none of
and
that.
approval doesn't matter.
I still have the community. I have all of the close relationships I've ever had, and all of the relationships that somehow involved those recommendations and grades and other things that can be more complicated dropped away.
Do you feel like you're following your calling more honestly and more purely now?
Oh, very much so. Yeah. Very much so, yes. And it's precisely, I think, because I am honoring my deepest needs and my most genuine rhythms.
And you said, in your book, you said something to the effect that your career was snuffing out your vocation.
That was my fear, yes, that academe, from the time I had been an undergraduate, had beckoned me as a field of dreams. And I felt, well, if we build it, it will come.
You weren't reacting to, the pressure to publish, which is a frustration that lots of young academics have. You've actually published quite a bit since leaving the formal profession.
Oh, far, far more than I ever would have.
You've written some about pursuing other dimensions of your life. This isn't just about getting to do the writing and the teaching that you want to do. It's about your broader life. It's about your spiritual needs and your personal relationships and so forth. Can you tell me more about that and how this has changed that part of the picture?
Well, I simply believe that by following your own deepest calling, that is the kingdom within. And you have to listen and vibrate to that inner voice, both as it manifests itself in your outer activities, whatever that vocation or profession or career might be, and also then to use that as an avenue to gain clarity about your inner landscape. And the two really have to be synergistic. We know how to drive to work in our sleep, but very often our inner landscape is just enshrouded in darkness and shadows. And what I have found is that by honoring my own rhythms, which entailed just, hey, if you want to write today for an hour or a half hour or not at all, that's fine. If you want to just see these friends, you sit outdoors, that's fine. You can meet your needs. You could devote yourself to your journals. I've probably, my main activity, this is a little bit like Henry David Thoreau after he wrote Walden, is not in publications, although I have written a lot for publication. I have probably, I think now, 120 or 30 thick-bound volumes of journals of my personal reflections. And I would write several pages a day exploring this inner landscape. What's the kingdom within?
How do you see this as serving the world or making a difference in the world beyond, I mean, there's almost a way that this could be seen ironically as hedonistic, as self-pleasing above all, and yet it feels to me as if what you said about teaching and writing for others and so forth is a kind of desire to serve others. How do you reconcile those?
Well, again, my conviction is that that Old Testament passage is indeed very true. First freedom, then service. And I've always subscribed to the adage of St. Irenaeus, the 4th century bishop. The joy of living is to be most truly alive. And so if I am at my most animated and vitalistic, then in all kinds of ways I'm contributing to the quality of life of
others,
other people, in every single small encounter. And the fuller and richer I am, the more sun-filled, S-O-N-filled, then the more I am simply going to pour forth, like an S-U-N, and radiate others.
Nice, yeah.
And that really has been my experience, that it doesn't have to be in the Mother Teresa vein, as noble and wonderful as that is.
Yeah.
That is, it's much more a matter of honoring your own particular idiosyncratic, eccentric vocation, your path.
Mm-hmm.
And that's your inner landscape to get to know.
So in a way, your ability to live the simple life and your dedication to self-care as a way of preparing you for service, in a way, all that is kind of a gift that you have that enables you to do what you do for others and with others.
I discovered that I was a 21st century scholar gypsy.
Yeah, yes.
You know, that more or less a traveling minstrel who would just be on his own and sing his own song. And that if I could realize it on paper as well, mm-hmm. then it would be something that would be preserved mm-hmm. and that could reach a very wide audience.
So there's an integrity to that lifestyle, and there's also a legacy that you leave. Before you left teaching, I don't know if I would say wrestled, you recognized that to live the way you wanted to live, you would need to find a community of like-minded people. Have you been able to do that? You seem not to have done that in the context of the job, but you've talked about since then, you've made friendships that are more pure because they're not fettered by the need to use others.
Well, I feel I was extremely fortunate in my personal history by teaching high school and then going for the PhD and then being at a university for several years, namely that I had a community. I feared that it was being swamped by the hierarchy.
Right.
And so that core community was preserved. Then when I left, I was able to connect with a community of minds and spirits mm-hmm. through the writing and other activities, and thereby broaden it. So what was winnowed was everything that had to do with the careerism and the hierarchy.
Okay.
And what was sanctified was the community itself, that is, the integrity of those relationships that were deepest and most authentic.
Is there a way that our culture could go back to a less formal educational process where the life of the mind becomes more, just more simple and more human? Or is that, you've done a lot of scholarship on utopian literature, is that kind of unrealistic, or do you see it as a viable possibility?
For years I taught a course called The History of Utopian Thinking. Mm-hmm. And Robert Hutchins, the former president of the University of Chicago, wrote a little book many decades ago called The University of Utopia. Mm-hmm. And in that book, he posits some experiments of this kind. That is, what would happen if we tried to dismantle mm-hmm. the current multiversity model? I must say, on a practical level, there's no going back.
It'd be a mess. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no going back. Every indication is to move in the opposite direction toward a more corporate institution, toward a university that's built more on the business model.
Well, it's very efficient that way.
Yes, and of course, again, on a practical level, many universities just see that as an absolute necessity for survival.
Sure.
The state universities get less federal funding and state funding. The private universities can't rely on their endowments in this market. They have to be very pragmatic about their economic investments.
Well, I do, and I think I'm not a highly materialistic person, but it's scary for me to imagine giving up health insurance. And I, like you, don't have a family to support, but a lot of people do. Your life might be very different if you had a wife and children that you had to worry about, right?
And even in my case, one of the things everybody was asking me when I was leaving was, what are you going to do for health insurance?
Right.
And for about 10 years, I had no health insurance. It's more recently, just in the last 2 years, that I made a commitment that I said, yeah, some of my resources need to be put toward that. Mm-hmm. And I just put that aside.
How do you pay the bills? Is it from writing royalties?
It's from a lot of journalism I've done, okay. and from visiting various universities and doing talks. I also do things like spiritual retreats, mm-hmm. and otherwise my book royalties. But as I say, I have found that not only can I live, but thrive
on having very little.
A few thousand a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that it largely is a fallacy, again on a practical level, to think that you can have it all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reminded of Yeats's poem, The Choice. Yeah. I'm reminded of that beautiful poem And he realized himself that the choice really entailed perfection of the life or of the work. And everyone has to choose. Mm-hmm. Everyone has to choose. And he says that if one chooses the latter, then one forgoes a heavenly mansion. That is, one forgoes, let's say, the possibility of a rich, fulfilled life with family mm-hmm. and security and so forth. But the fact that one may choose to perfect the work, which arguably is the direction I've gone in, mm-hmm. doesn't mean necessarily that that is a better choice.
Right.
It simply means that that is a different path, and hopefully you've chosen that path because you're honoring who you are.
Oh, that's great, yeah.
Your
Thank
best
you, John.
self.
And hopefully we can honor each other with recognizing and appreciating those choices, right?
Yes.
Thank you so much. My guest today has been John Rodden, an independent scholar and prolific writer who resigned from a prestigious university in order to pursue a more satisfying life. I'm Karen Saupe. Thank you for watching Inner Compass.